Welcome to Forbes Movies. Joining me now is Scott Mendelson, a Forbes entertainment analyst and box office pundit. Scott, thank you so much for joining me today.
Always a pleasure. Always good to be here. Hope you had a lovely weekend.
I did, thank you. I hope you did as well. So to kick it off, first of all, what was the winners and losers at the box office this weekend?
There were mostly winners this weekend, relatively speaking. Black Adam opened with 67 million domestic, 140 worldwide, which is a pretty solid debut, all things considered. It is Dwayne Johnson's biggest opening weekend for a star vehicle, and it's his biggest opening weekend for something that isn't a Fast and Furious sequel. Fast 5, Fast 6, Furious 7, Fate of the Furious. To be fair, he's barely in Furious 7, but I digress. It is, in terms of like recent comic book openings, it's, below Eternals and Shang-Chi and, Venom 2 and what have you. But it's DC's by default biggest non-Batman or Batman adjacent opening weekend since Aquaman in late 2018. Now that film opened just before Christmas and was the leggiest live action comic book movie since Tim Burton's Batman. It legged out to $334 million from a 72 opening, which even by Christmas standards, that's leggy as hell.
So is this going to end the DC is doomed conversation?
No, of course not. Nothing will, as long as the SEO drives that conversation. I mean, they could, frickin' Wonder Woman 3 could win Best Picture, and they'd still be thinking, gosh, is DC in disarray? And, between you and me, I mean, and I've been wondering this for years, as much money as Warner Brothers makes on a lot of DC products, I mean, it's a constant pain in the ass in terms of their overall studio image. Because, I mean, for example, 2017, Wonder Woman was kicking ass and taking names. It was a huge hit. Dunkirk was huge. Even the Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, the first one, had just opened or earned about $820 million worldwide in late 2016. Everything, Kong Skull Island had done 570 on a 180 budget with good reviews. Basically everything but the DC films were doing very, very well. But because Justice League came out and was, a disliked critical disaster that frankly bombed at the box office, everyone's like, oh no, Warner Brothers sucks. They can't do anything right. Look at these DC films, blah, blah, blah. Where for a while, I would argue, changing ownership and shifting goals and COVID complications notwithstanding, they've been a pretty solid studio for everything except DC. And even when DC is going right, they still have to deal with what I would argue is sort of a quasi-civil war in terms of the fan bases, the people that just like DC Comics movies, people that really want the Snyder stuff to make a comeback, people that really don't want the Snyder stuff to make a comeback. And all of these people are yelling at each other online, and it looks chaotic. But back to Black Adam, I mean, the film cost $195 million, which is a lot for what's basically a C-level DC hero, and it's a lot for a Dwayne Johnson vehicle. Most of his big star vehicles, and I'm thinking Rampage, Journey to the Incredible Island, Jumanji, Welcome to the Jungle, Jumanji The Next Level, Skyscraper, San Andreas. These are films that cost anywhere from $90 to $125 million. So a film like Rampage could make 430 worldwide and be a huge hit, let alone something like Jumanji that legs out to 962 in late 2017. Jungle Cruise cost $200 million, which was a big reason why it wasn't a commercial success, COVID issues notwithstanding. It was available on Premier Access. But spending $200 million on a Black Adam movie is a risk. And the hope now is that it legs out to 170 domestic, doesn't get kneecapped by Black Panther Wakanda Forever in 3 weeks, and does best case scenario business overseas. A, because it needs overseas business to break even, and B, because you don't know if it's going to play in China or not. Dwayne Johnson, Vin Diesel, and Jason Statham are among the few, what I would argue, are butts in seats movie stars in China. Rampage made 155 in China. The Meg did 155 in China. Triple X, The Return of Xander Cage, made 165 in China in 2017. That's one of the few movies that would have been an outright flop, but because it did so well in China, it was a hit, where it did 385 million worldwide on an 80 budget. That is an exception to the rule. Most movies Hollywood movies that do well in China are the same ones that do well everywhere else.
So when will we
And
find out if it's going to be released in China?
I don't know, to be honest. I've heard rumblings that it's going to be. It's just a question of when, and I can't confirm or deny that. And even if it does open, how is it going to play? And by that, I mean, with a couple exceptions, films that have opened in China since 2020 have performed either a lot less than they would have in pre-COVID times or just outright flopped. The Batman did $20 million in China. Hobbs and Shaw did 205 million in China in 2019. Fate of the Furious did 393 in 2017, while F9 did just 205 in 2021. There are a couple exceptions. Godzilla v Kong did 188 in early 2021, which is basically business as usual. Free Guy did 95 million in China in August of 2021. That was incredible. But right now, Hollywood's in a situation where they're basically not counting any money they might get from China as part of their financial calculation going forward, because it's not reliable anymore. You might end up with a Godzilla v Kong, or you might end up with a Wonder Woman 84, which barely does 25.
So with that being said, did Black Adam perform better than expected?
No, I don't think so. I mean, there are always people, pie in the sky. Ooh, it's going to do $100 million because it's a DC film with The Rock. Well, there's a lot of overlapping demographics there. You have a lot of people that like watching a kid-friendly Dwayne Johnson action fantasy that are the same people that were going to show up for a DC Comics picture. Did you have some give and take on both demos where I'm not interested in DC Comics, but I like The Rock, or I care less about The Rock, but I like DC Comics? Yeah, sure. But that's why it opened to 67 million, and not the 53 or 57 million that Shazam did back in early 2019. That got great reviews, strong buzz, had a sneak preview, but it was also based on a relatively C-list character, and Zachary Levi, good actor by all accounts, a nice guy, but not a movie star, not a butts in the seats draw. What Dwayne Johnson's been doing for most of his career as an actor is he is making franchise films, often playing we could argue possibly marquee characters, but they are franchises where he is bigger than the franchise. Dwayne Johnson is bigger than Rampage. Dwayne Johnson was bigger than Jumanji. Dwayne Johnson is bigger than Black Adam. And what was interesting about Black Adam is that it was the first time we had seen one of these Marvel DC pictures where the actor was bigger than the character, probably since Nicolas Cage's Ghost Rider in 2007. And before that, I would argue Wesley Snipes' Blade in 1998. My feeling going into the opening weekend was that it was going to play like a upper level Dwayne Johnson opener, Jumanji: The Next Level, Hobbs and Shaw, San Andreas, and would open with around $60-65 million. And if everything went right, it might hit 70-75. But the reviews weren't good, so it has to settle for 67 million. Now, I will still argue that the reviews didn't do that much damage, because even the bad reviews assured consumers that if they were just going to see Black Adam for an IMAX-friendly, kid-friendly superhero smackdown story with The Rock, you're going to get what you pay for.
So in these instances where the actor is bigger than the character, does that help the film or hurt it?
Well, I think it sort of balances out. And it depends on how big the actor is. I obviously Dwayne Johnson starring in a film like Snitch, which is very good, by the way, is only going to get you so much money, even in 2013, let alone 2022. But Dwayne Johnson as Black Adam is more of a character, actor plus character sell, like Tom Hardy as Venom, where Venom is obviously a bigger draw than someone like Tom Hardy, but Tom Hardy is liked and respected, and he has a quirky on-screen persona. So watching him go full crazy as Eddie Brock in Venom has a certain appeal to it. So honestly, it's a case-by-case basis.
Got it. And based on this weekend alone, do you think that there's going to be a Black Adam 2, or will we have to wait to see if it legs out?
Well, idealistically, you wait to see if it legs out. Um, I don't think even if the film, because you got a B plus from Cinema Score, the verified Rotten Tomatoes score is pretty good. I don't like to use that as a barometer because opt-in polls can be massaged. Um, but I don't think Warner Brothers slash DC Films, whoever the hell is running it at any given time, is going to let a character played by Dwayne Johnson fall completely by the wayside. So even if you don't get a full on Black Adam 2, you might get Shazam 3, where, because initially Black Adam is a Shazam villain. I mean, that's the character. Um, I know Dwayne Johnson spent the last 3 weeks talking about how he really wants to fight Superman because he's too good for Shazam. Um, and no, I don't think that did much to boost the opening weekend gross either way. I think the people that were super duper excited for theoretically a big cameo in the mid credits cookie were already the kind of people that would see any DC movie regardless.
Mhm.
Um, were my kids interested in the cameo? Sure, but you know what? They were a hell of a lot more interested when Shadow popped up at the end of Sonic the Hedgehog 2. Um, but again, getting back to, I do think you are going to see Black Adam again in the DC universe. I don't know necessarily if it's going to be a straight on Black Adam 2 or something else. Where maybe a Shazam movie where he's the villain, or maybe you will get a Black Adam versus Superman movie. I don't know.
Do you think that would be the smarter route to have him as a villain in Shazam 3 to give it Shazam 3 that added value?
Yes. Yes. I mean, yeah, that I absolutely agree with that. I may or may not write that post later this week, depending on if time allows. I'm getting my COVID shot, one of my COVID boosters this morning, so I might be dead for the next 48 hours. We'll see. Um, Not dead. I mean, I may be very sick. Apparently, it knocks you out. But yeah, I absolutely agree with you. In my opinion, the best use of that character is as an added value element in something else. The same way that, frankly, Henry Cavill's Superman is of best use as an added value element in something else, as Marvel has been doing with Mark Ruffalo's The Hulk for since the Avengers. The Hulk bombed in 2003. The Incredible Hulk bombed in 2008. Two different actors, two different franchises, or whatever. Those films made almost identical amounts of money. So there is clearly, I would argue, to a certain extent, I don't want to say there's absolutely a ceiling on a solo Hulk film because it's been a while, but I do think there is a risk on assuming that 10 years of Marvel kicking ass and taking over the world will make a solo Hulk film that much of a bigger deal than it was in 2008. I may be wrong, and they're welcome to try. It's
So
not
it's
my money.
smarter just to throw the Hulk into a different movie instead.
Yes,
Okay.
because then he gets to Hulk smash, and that's all. And that's fun. The same thing, you could have Superman that comes down, saves the day. He's a cheerful, nice, happy dude that likes doing his job and makes everybody feel good about themselves, and then flies off to the fortune of solitude.
And so I do want to talk about another movie that came out this weekend, which was Ticket to Paradise. What was the response to that?
Um, a better opening weekend than I dared hope. It made 16.3 million in domestic debut, which I'll be honest, 10 years ago, that would have been a slight disappointment for a Julia Roberts, George Clooney rom-com. That would have been an easy $20 million opening weekend. But the audience that tends to go to star-driven vehicles and adult skewing movies and non-franchise fare, that audience has shifted dramatically to streaming 7 years ago. Or they did shift to streaming 6, 7 years ago. And obviously COVID only exacerbated the situation. So it's a $60 million picture. It has already made 80 million overseas for a $96 million total. I think offhand, it's probably going to do about 150 worldwide, which is over under 2.5 the budget, which is fine. It will break even in theaters. It will do very well on PVOD, I'm guessing, because you're going to have a lot of audience members that might have been interested in that, but either don't like going to the theaters or would rather pay $20 to rent it in a month after their kids go to bed. It got mixed reviews. I think it's fine. I had a good time with it. Clooney and Roberts are still smoke shows, even in their old age. Gives me hope. And it's kind of movie that your parents will love.
So
My parents are going on Tuesday, like a cliche.
Oh, good. I love that. So, You said it would be disappointing 10 years ago, but now it was better than expected. Do you think that the promising numbers of today indicate that there's going to be more rom-coms getting a theatrical release?
God, I hope so. I mean, The Lost City is technically a rom-com. It just was more of an, it was an action caper picture too. And that's been one of the struggles for the last 6 or 7 years is that, and this isn't just comedy, this is genre in general. People tend to gravitate toward straight genre films when there's something else in the mix. And honestly, sometimes that's a franchise. You know, Deadpool, people want to see a comedy, see Deadpool. People who want to see a teen coming of age story, see Spider-Man No Way Home. People who want to see a Western, go to see Logan, etc. A heist film, they see the Ant-Man pictures, etc., etc., etc. And that has been a problem for the quote unquote genuine article. Even to a certain extent, something like The Lost City, which is a throwback and was pretty successful, about 190 on a 70 budget theatrically and did about 105 domestic. But that was also an adventure picture. So it was a rom-com adventure. It wasn't just a straight rom-com. The same way that, something like A Star is Born, yes, it's a romantic drama, but it's also a glorified musical. Or, Elvis is a drama, but it's also a glorified musical. Mm-hmm. But to get back to your point, yes, I do think the relative success of Ticket to Paradise, and I'm assuming it's going to be very leggy because those kind of films that are aimed at adult audiences that don't necessarily race out on opening weekend tend to be leggy. It's also the only game in town for a while. If you don't like Marvel DC, if you don't like horror movies, if you don't like cartoons,
that's the only option for you.
Other than, some slowly expanding Oscar pictures that some are more commercial than others. But so, yeah, I think it will be leggy. It might leg out to $50-60 million domestic, might do 150 worldwide, and that'll be fine. And if it does, do exceptionally well or relatively well on PVOD, what we've seen so far over the last year and change, even if we don't have the hard numbers, we just have to take it on faith, is that the PVOD system, especially for Universal and Focus Features, Comcast, has provided a new revenue stream that does not cannibalize theatrical, that gives an opportunity for these old school studio programmers like Ambulance, like the Ticket to Paradise, like The Northman, which was a $70 million R-rated Viking melodrama that barely made 65 million worldwide, that according to Universal, and I have to take them at their word, did so well on PVOD that it actually made a profit at the end. And if a movie like that can make money through theaters and PVOD, there's hope for everything. I mean, there's now no longer any excuse not to throw anything into theaters. I like that movie. That's not a diss on the film. It's a really good film. But it also would have been an uncommercial film 20 years ago.
I like your optimistic tone there, Scott. But so you think that's going to be leggy. Do you think Black Adam is going to be leggy? Or do you think the release of Wakanda Forever is going to just stop it in its tracks?
I don't know, because conventional wisdom suggests that Wakanda Forever is going to open like an atom bomb, and everything else, action-y, genre-y, is just going to get wiped out. That's basically what happened to Shazam in early 2019, when it was actually legging out pretty well until Avengers Endgame made $1.2 billion in its global opening weekend. I don't necessarily expect Wakanda Forever to do that well, although
Why not?
The first tracking said, because it's Avengers Endgame. I never expect any film to open to 350 million domestic and 1.2 billion worldwide. That being said, the initial tracking suggests 175 for domestic for Wakanda Forever, and it could do 175, it could do 275. It's the film screens for its big LA premiere on Wednesday night. The social media embargo drops pretty much right when the screening is over. The review embargo is a few days before release, which isn't that unusual. I think Disney just wants 2 hype cycles. And yeah, could it do what would be huge for November, which is, right now the biggest opening weekend ever in November is the Hunger Games Catching Fire with 158. It could open closer to Thor, Love and Thunder and Jurassic World Dominion over under 145 and still leg out past 500 million if it legs like Frozen 2. which did 477 from 130 in 2019. Um, or it could open like frickin' Spider-Man No Way Home, The Force Awakens, and Avengers Infinity War, which is over under 260. I don't necessarily want to predict that because that's you don't want a situation where Disney's on the defensive because it only did 180 on opening weekend. But I think unless the reviews come out and the film is bad and just a 2 hour and 40 minute wake for Chadwick Boseman, all due respect, i.e., not a fun time at the movies, I have to say the sky's the limit. That being said, as it relates to Black Adam, even if Black Adam will probably get its ass kicked in its third weekend, it's still one of the last tentpoles left this year, alongside Puss in Boots 2, Disney's Strange Worlds over Thanksgiving, and of course Avatar: The Way of Water in mid-December. So it will still be one of the only games in town for a while.
What do you think, your prediction here, what do you think is going to be the biggest tentpole of the year?
Offhand, I think Black Panther Wakanda Forever will be higher than Avatar: The Way of Water in North America, but I think Avatar: The Way of Water will rule worldwide.
Got
Uh,
it.
because I mean the last film made 2 billion overseas, with China only contributing $200 million in 2009, 2010. Um, and if it does play in China, and if it plays, I mean, the Avatar made $55 million in a re-release last year.
Hmm.
So, generally speaking, Chinese audiences like Avatar, and they're right. But Chinese audiences really like Avatar. And unless the film is like bad, and let's be honest, James Cameron's never made a truly bad film. All due respect to Piranha 2, which he was fired from early on. Um, unless it's like bad, I mean, do I think it's going to automatically do as well as the first Avatar did globally? Yeah, that's again that's a dangerous prediction. I don't want them to be on the defensive when it only makes $1.2 billion worldwide. The most
Yeah, because
important thing for Avatar 2 is that it be, a relative hit, and that it's good enough that people care about Avatar 3, 4, and 5.
and are 3, 4, and 5 coming out soon? Because we've
I
been
think it's
waiting
every
like,
2 years.
oh, so why the 13-year wait then, or 13-ish years?
Because it took a gosh darn long time to make. And I think absent COVID, we might have seen it like in 2020.
Okay.
Or maybe do that. I think the initial before COVID, the official release date was December 2020. Where not to get into politics, but it would have been sort of the first post-Trump blockbuster of that era. Because it would have opened a month after he had lost his reelection bid, which would have been weirdly fitting since James Cameron is a giant ippy that's just very good at making stuff blow up. Um, and but yeah, I mean, it's. I think it was officially announced in 2014, and it's been delayed one time after another, over and over and over again for 13 years. And I hope. Well, yeah, I mean, I hope the other sequels come out on schedule because I'd like to, see them before I perish from this mortal coil. Um, but yeah, I think it took 13 years just because James Cameron doesn't rush. And for one reason or another, I think he filmed a lot of all five of the films, if not all five of the films, uh, concurrently. At least the ones because there are kids involved in the cast. I think 2, 3, and maybe 2 and 3. I think are the kids at the same age, and then I think there's a
Okay.
time jump in 4. But don't quote me on that.
I do, before I let you go, want to talk about a recent announcement that came out on Friday, and that is Conjuring 4 is reportedly in the making at New Line. What do you make of that?
Well, it's a no-brainer. The Conjuring films have made $2 billion worldwide on a combined budget of like 150 million or something like that. I apologize for not having the numbers right in front of me. It is the biggest grossing R-rated horror franchise of all time. In fact, I think it's the biggest R-rated franchise of all time, period. Yeah, I think it is. And in terms of anything that you could count as a quote unquote scary movie series, the only thing that's bigger is the Jurassic franchise. And you can get into fistfights with people arguing whether those are horror films or not. I think the first two definitely are, but after that, it's a coin toss. Um, And there was some talk, there was some concern after David Zaslav did his big, these are all of Warner Brothers' awesome IP that we have presentation, and Conjuring was not on the poster board. It's like, again, I think it's more useful to judge what the studios do rather than what they say.
Hmm.
And that's actually good advice in general, even in politics. One of the reasons I think Rachel Maddow was even more useful than usual during the Trump era is that she tended to report on what Donald Trump did rather than just what he said. But I digress. They were never going to not make Conjuring films. I mean, the last one did $200 million on a 39 budget in 2021. That wasn't that much worse than Annabelle Comes Home in summer 2019. These films are popular, they are well liked, they are reasonably budgeted, and the Conjuring universe is the first and I would argue only fully functioning, entirely successful post Avengers cinematic universe.
So,
So, Hollywood spent 10 years trying to make their own. Conjuring's the only one that actually pulled it off
do you think
without a
there's
hitch.
do you think there's going to be a rival to the Conjuring universe because it's so successful?
No, because I think they would have tried already. I think, unfortunately, the Hollywood mentality right now is sort of, when you're trying to do that, you go big. I don't think The Conjuring was initially intended as a quote unquote cinematic universe. I just think that's how it worked out. And James Wan and Walter Hamada were so successful in that after Justice League crashed and burned, Warner Brothers did the very logical thing and said, "Hey, Walter, you want to come fix DC?" And he did. And he did. But now he's gone because nobody seemed to, give him any credit for that. But I digress.
Except you, because you are his biggest fan the past few
Well,
weeks.
for all I know, he's a terrible human being. I've never met him. For all I know, he hates my guts for one reason or another. But I think as an executive, he did what he was hired to do. He did what a lot of us all said we wanted DC to do, which is make a series of loosely interconnected DC Comics films that varied in size, scale, budget, and genre, most of which were either got good reviews or strong box office. And even if it was never going to compete on the same world as Marvel, because they had, a several year head start, they started back when, Captain America could make 371 and be a huge hit on a 140 budget. Um, there was still a world, especially before COVID, where DC was going to thrive alongside Marvel, playing a slightly different game, playing by slightly different rules, and with the notions of success, slightly different than what was expected from Marvel, because Marvel couldn't make a movie like Joker or a movie like Birds of Prey or a movie like The Suicide Squad.
Why not?
Well, because they're R-rated. Well, they're R-rated films, or they're only loosely connected or not connected at all in the case like Joker from the quote unquote cinematic universe. The Batman, that's its own thing. That
Yeah.
is not connected to DC films. Um, and again, that was all of these films were in production or in development before COVID. And had they all opened as planned, along with Wonder Woman 1984, you would have had a years long winning streak where most of these films were commercial successes and or got excellent reviews.
So Walter Hamada is reportedly out of Warner Brothers now. Do you think there's a world where he goes back to the Conjuring franchise?
Oh no, he's out of Warner Brothers, period. I
Okay.
think he's very unhappy with how, and again, without getting into good and evil, without getting into right or wrong, he is very unhappy with how he was treated over the last 2 years, and especially when David Zaslav came in. You know, he produced Batgirl. He produced Batgirl under the the quote unquote orders of Jason Kilar of AT&T, who wanted streaming level movies on the DC universe that were intent to premiere on HBO Max. So he fought without getting melodramatic here. He followed the orders of the last person, and he was penalized for it by the new regime. Which, whatever. Again, this is movies. This isn't politics. This isn't good and evil here. Now, where he ends up, I don't know. I'd like to think that everyone knows that he's very good at what he does in terms of being executive. I imagine he will end up at like Universal or Netflix, or anyone that wants him can get him. And I imagine he won't be unemployed for any longer than he wants to be. I'm inclined to think he'll end up at Universal because he knows people there. And I think it's in Universal's benefit to continue to make the sale that they are a place for, they are a safe place for promising and or marquee filmmakers that don't necessarily want to make a bunch of big budget franchises, as we've seen with Chris Nolan, Michael Bay, Jordan Peele, M. Night Shyamalan, probably a couple others that I'm forgetting.
Well, Scott Mendelson, thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Always a pleasure.